Over to you, Norman.
Okay, well, good evening, and looking forward to this night. As many of you, we've got two wonderful speakers here that will be sharing with us tonight. And the topic, as you know, where to after Bondi. And the two speakers that we have is lawyer Damien Freeman, who will be the first one to speak, and Barbara will take it from here. And also our next speaker that we also will have tonight is Dr. Mike Kelly. So I want to welcome Damien and Dr. Mike Kelly here tonight, but also each one of you. So thank you for coming on to this Zoom here tonight.
Yes, thank you so much. Damien is a fellow at the Robert Menzies Institute at the University of Melbourne. His recent publications include The End of Settlement, Why the 2023 Referendum Failed, because he was very involved in that. He also wrote an occasional paper for the Centre for Independent Studies, Overcoming Enmity and Restoring Confidence, Anti-Semitism's Challenge to Our Civic Compact. And there's so much more to tell. As some of you heard, he's travelling with Gillian Envoy, the anti-Semitism envoy who he works with, and he's a lawyer in Sydney. So over to you, Damien. Very happy
Barbara
to have
and
you.
Barbara and Norman, thanks so much for inviting me to speak tonight, and and for fitting in my schedule. I'd got something else to go to, so I thought maybe if I speak for about 20 minutes, and then if there are any questions, if people have any comments or anything, I can take that for a bit. And I've been asked to speak to the proposition where to after the massacre at Bondi. And I'm mindful in doing this that Mike is going to talk a bit about the Royal Commission and intelligence gathering and the failures there and the threats to take it the failure to ensure the security of the Australian people and what he thinks needs to be done to deal with that moving forward. Um, I'm going to talk about something a bit different. So my way into this, though, I'll say, as Barbara mentioned, I spent 10 years working on the constitutional referendum, and I published a book, The End of Settlement, and I worked very closely for a long time with Noel Pearson and his colleagues, and we were trying to find a way forward that would be acceptable to both conservatives and the Indigenous leaders. And as I said, I did that for about 10 years. We failed spectacularly. It's been published by others now about my very central role in developing that proposition and developing it as a conservative proposition and something that I thought it would be possible for conservatives to support. And I had a particular reason for thinking that would be the case. And we failed spectacularly. I still think it was a good idea. But what became apparent to me was that over the 10 years that I spent on that, it was more and more difficult to get people to agree about anything. Um, and I think the referendum revealed how polarized the country was and is. And I think that's for me one of the fundamental things about that referendum is it's going to mark an era that we're now in, and we're seeing the sense in which social cohesion is deteriorating, and there's less and less that we have in common, it seems, and the Prime Minister keeps telling us that we need to sort of come together and we need to be unified, but if we have to be honest, the country looks less and less unified, and this is a real worry. And the president's visit has shown us that, what those scenes, whatever, whether or not you agreed or disagreed with the protesters outside Sydney Town Hall, everything about that and the whole way that it's unfolded has just revealed how how fractured Australia is, how frayed the social compact in Australia is, how difficult it is for us now to find common ground to be able to be civilized. And as I say, if you read my book, The End of Settlement, you'll get a sense of why I thought 10 years before the referendum that it would be possible and that it was in the tradition of the Australian settlement to be able to find common ground, even when we disagreed about things. But that became more and more difficult over time. And I was approached by the Centre for Independent Studies to write a paper that Barbara mentioned that was published a couple of weeks ago. You'll find it on their website if you have a look, a recent paper that I wrote. And it was quite specific what they wanted me to do. They wanted me to look at the challenge that anti-Semitism presents for the civic compact in Australia. Uh, and I'm not sure if the paper I gave them was exactly what they were expecting, but let me explain to you how I understood the civic compact that the Centre for Independent Studies was interested in and why I think anti-Semitism is such a challenge for it. And in turn, I think we can see something about the big problems we're facing with social cohesion. So I think the social compact the civic compact, the basis for how we live together as a country, what it is that justifies our system of government and our whole way of living together is is broadly about tolerance, right? It's this idea that, we mightn't agree about everything, but we're the kind of place where we don't need to make everyone agree with us. We can accept that people disagree with us, and where there's disagreement, we can tolerate that. And that's the basis, I think, for all our institutions is this idea that yeah, it's okay to disagree about things, and it's okay to disagree about really important things, and we can respect the fact up to a point. There are some things that we can't tolerate, and that we say no, that's just unacceptable. But this country has been a very tolerant country, and it's been a country that's been willing to entertain quite a bit of disagreement, and it's been able to do that through this idea of tolerance. So the idea that, if someone's different from you, you can understand this difference as a matter of disagreement. And if there's a disagreement, it's possible to manage that disagreement through tolerance, through saying, yeah, yeah, we accept that we don't all agree about things, and within certain parameters, that's okay, that's fine, we don't have to. And I think that's breaking down. And I'll say something about why I think it's breaking down and the challenges. But I also want to say something very particular about anti-Semitism and why anti-Semitism is such a challenge for this idea of tolerance, and this idea of a civic compact, uh, a way of life that's all about tolerance. So as I've mentioned, when we talk about tolerance, we're talking about the fact that there's a disagreement, that people disagree with one another, and when they disagree, they have to decide how to treat the people they disagree with. And you can shun the person, there are a whole lot of things you could do, but one thing it says, yeah, yeah, you know what, I don't agree with you, but I can tolerate you, and I can tolerate the fact that you live differently. Um, and that's the way that I think a lot of this country, we've seen that's the way it works. But once we saw a surge in anti-Semitism, this way of thinking was never going to help us, right? Because the fundamental thing you need to understand about anti-Semitism is anti-Semitism isn't about disagreement. It's about hatred. And it doesn't make sense to say to people, "Oh, you should tolerate things that you or people that you hate." Like that's an irrational thing, right? If you hate something, you shouldn't tolerate it. We shouldn't, it's quite right that we say, for instance, I think we could say as a society, we find sexual abuse of children, domestic violence. We find these things abhorrent, and we won't tolerate them. We won't make space to tolerate them because these are things that we hate, and we have a shared hatred of them. And we're right, therefore, to say, no, there's no place for these things in our society. These aren't things to be tolerated because they're things that we hate, and we're right in hating them. And so it's very important to understand what anti-Semitism is fundamentally is a form of hatred. It dresses itself up in different ways, and some ways will seem more intellectual than other ways, and they sound very sophisticated. But at the end of the day, it has been called the oldest hate, and it is a hate that has persisted and has manifested in different ways, in religious ways, in a hatred for the Jews as the people who killed Christ, a hatred of the Jews on a racial understanding as people who are racially inferior, a hatred of the Jews most recently and in its modern sense as a national group that asserts itself and its right to have a homeland its ancestral land in what is now the state of Israel. And a lot of the challenge is for us to see this is actually hatred. And in its modern form, um, and this is a really big challenge for, I think, is to understand when are we having a reasonable disagreement, and when is this actually just a mask for hatred? And a lot of work's being done on this, and I'm not the first one to say that it is legitimate to criticize the policy of the government of the State of Israel. I accept that. We all, I think, accept that it's reasonable to disagree about what any government does, the policy of a government. And indeed, it has to be said, the government of Benjamin Netanyahu has been a controversial government, and you can think they're on the right path or not on the right path, and you're entitled to agree or disagree about that. And I totally understand that people are very concerned about the plight of the Palestinian people. But what we need to understand is sometimes this way of talking about Israel, when you boil it down, turns out really to be an expression of hatred, an expression of Jew hate. And that's what anti-Semitism is. And that's what we're confronted with at the moment. And the point that I try to explain in this paper, there's a very big challenge for a society that's been built fundamentally on this idea of tolerance, because you can't ask people to tolerate things that they hate, or people that they hate for that matter. So, what I try to explain in my paper is I think there is a way through this. And the way through is we have to help people see that where there is difference, they don't have to experience difference as hate. It's possible to see that where there's difference, what there is actually a disagreement. And it's like, yeah, it's true that we see the world differently, but it doesn't have to follow from that I hate you. And if we can cultivate in children, in particular, a sense that there's a that there are areas of life where it's legitimate for us to disagree, then of course we can go down the path of being tolerant of disagreement. But in order for that to work, we have to help the children, as it were, not to hate, not to feel hate, to realize that when they're confronted with difference, that there's an alternative other than feeling hate. Because once you experience hate, it's too late to try. It's not going to work to try to talk about tolerance once there's hatred. And and this is a central part, I think, of what it's not the only thing. And, Mike will talk about things that are in the short term, certainly going to be much more important. But in the longer term, this is about the fact that we have to help children to cultivate virtues, right? To understand that there are better and worse ways of living, and a better way of living is that when you experience people who are different, you understand that this difference is a disagreement, and in this sort of disagreement, you can tolerate people who disagree with you. And so that's why I think there's this work, and I've written a bit about why I think the work that Rabbi Zalman Castell is doing with Together for Humanity, I think is really important because it's about cultivating this. And this is an idea that he takes a Jew, a Christian, and a Muslim into schools, and they model this disagreement, this respectful disagreement in front of the school children, and they show them that, yeah, it's true we disagree with one another, but we can still tolerate one another. We don't have to hate one another just because we disagree. And this is about teaching children how they should interact with the world. And so I think this is a really important thing, that we need to help children to see that they can disagree rather than hate. And if you disagree, you can tolerate disagreement. The other thing that I've written about in this paper, and I think this is the other big problem we face, is the effect of identity politics. And identity politics is doing something to our whole political life that is a really big problem. Um, because identity politics is based on critical race theory. And critical race theory is in turn based on Marxism. And Marx had an idea that there were social groups, that society consisted of groups that were fundamentally in opposition to one another. And that was that there were the capitalists, the people who owned the property, and there were the workers, who had labor, and there was a constant tension there, and that the people with capital were always going to oppress the people the workers. And this has been used by critical race theory in a different way to say, yeah, Marx was focused on this particular struggle, the class struggle. But critical race theory says that's not the only struggle. There are other struggles. For instance, there are racial struggles. And a lot of work was done in America about looking at the fact that black people in America were suffering a form of oppression that it was said was institutionalized, and that this was ongoing, and that the white people were using the institutions of American society and American government and everything about America to continue to oppress the black people. Now, it's certainly one thing to say that in the 1960s, 70s, that there was it's certainly the case that black people were suffering. There was discrimination. There were plenty of problems. I'm not saying there weren't, but this said something more than that. It said the whole structure of the society was about the fact that there are the oppressor group and there's the oppressed group, and that society is a battle between the oppressed and the oppressors. And this under this underpins this critical race theory underpins identity politics. And this is a real problem because it's a genuine belief of this way of thinking, that there's a constant tension between the oppressed and the oppressors, whether it's the white people and the black people, whether it's the Jews and the Palestinians, whether it's Catholics and Protestants. There are different ways that this could be set up, but there's this idea that there's just a fundamental sort of conflict between these two groups. And I think this this is going to encourage people to see hatred rather than disagreement, to see that we're fundamentally opposed to one another rather than that we fundamentally have things in common. And this is why I think critical race theory and therefore identity politics are really, really big problem because rather than steering us away from hate, they're predicated on the idea that this kind of this conflict and this fundamental hatred is the structure of society and is always going to be there. And life, that society is just a matter of helping the oppressed people to overcome the oppressors, and no sense that there's anything like the common good. And I think this is a real challenge for us. And I think these are, on the one hand, I've tried to sketch out how I think we can overcome hatred and how we can convert hatred into disagreement. And that's the sort of work that I think Rabbi Zalman Castell does and Together for Humanity, and this idea of helping children to see they don't have to, when they're confronted with difference, they don't have to hate people. They can actually see it as disagreement. And if you see it as disagreement, then you can embrace tolerance. And so that's one way to transform hate into disagreement and therefore tolerance. And on the other hand, there's this process going on through identity politics, which is pushing in the other direction and is encouraging people to see the world through this lens of oppression and hatred, and therefore encouraging people to say, no, this isn't just a matter of disagreeing. This is fundamentally a matter of oppression and hatred. And yeah, these are the challenges I think that the reason that anti-Semitism is such a challenge because it is about hatred, and therefore I think um,
I think someone's talking. Could you make sure you're muted, please? Go on, Damien.
and so
Could whoever it is who's got their microphone on, please turn it off. Thank you very much.
So that's fundamentally what I want to say, I think, about the challenge in Australia right now in terms of social cohesion is this sense that we're not really equipped to deal with hatred. We're equipped much better to deal with disagreement, and we have institutions that help people to understand if you disagree that you can be tolerant of disagreement. But that's not what anti-Semitism is. It's a form of hatred, and this is a real challenge to the way we're not set up really to deal with this kind of hatred. And on the other hand, we have this new form of politics, identity politics, that is pushing us further down that path. And so I think these are broadly the challenges that we've got. I might leave it. I mean, I'm happy to
Yes,
talk a bit
that
more,
sounds great,
but
Damien.
I'll hand over if people want to
Yes,
comment
that
or
was
ask questions.
a wonderful talk. We're very grateful for your considered thought there and what you have written. Could we have some questions, please? Just put your hand up. So the first person we've got is Paul Myers.
Yes, I'm unmuted and got my video on. Yes, Paul Myers, my name. I'm Vice President of State Science Council Queensland, and I did love intensely the message that Damien gave us. But I do have a question about the premise and the background to why he makes the sense he does. Yet to me, there's a really significant missing element to that. And the missing element that I see, and I'd love his opinion on, is that his views are predicated on the fact that everybody is interested in having a conversation, in discussing the pros and cons of their particular position. And being Jewish, obviously, well, not so obviously, but I guess you only got to look at me. But what I feel is happening is we're at the start of a major religious war worldwide, and the Jews are at the coalface of this, and Israel and Gaza have been I guess, the starting point of the excuse of the hate that spreads through the world and is getting worse and worse. And that, as I say, what starts with the Jews never ends with the Jews. And of course, the Christians in the world and the non-Islamic people, and I won't group all the Muslims together because that wouldn't be a fair assessment, but certainly radical Islam is taking over the world in a way that we see that this is just the opening shots. And I wonder where that ideology, where the intention of the Muslim culture to take over Judeo-Christian values in Western society plays a part within your theories. Thank you.
Well, it's a big challenge, and there's a reason that people are talking about immigration now and migration and saying we've got to be careful who we let into the country. It's a fact we've let people into the country. My book, The End of Settlement, takes this idea of settlement from the Church of England. I've got a chapter about this, the idea of the Church of England as a settlement. And what was special about the Church of England, I think, is that they got to a point where they realized there were fundamental disagreements, but that was okay. They could live with the fact that they had religious disagreement, and they could and within certain constraints, they could tolerate that, right? They didn't need to force everyone to have the same theology. And that, I think, gives us this idea of settlement. And I think that idea of settlement has been deeply influential in English political tradition and Australian political tradition. And it is an idea that, yeah, and I think we saw over time what then happened is not just within the Church of England, but then the Church of England could come to tolerate Catholics who had a more fundamental disagreement. But this idea that was, I think, a very special English idea that we can tolerate difference. We don't need, even in the world of religion, for everyone to agree. And I'm not saying that. I think part of the challenge is we've let people into this country who don't understand that tradition, and um, we haven't brought children up in a way that cultivates this, and we're basically, as a society, losing it. And yes, you talk about the fact that there is a world, there is increasing religious conflict. And this model of settlement and tolerance that worked very well in England and Australia might not be able to allow these countries to survive in the way they have in the context of these new challenges. I'm not, I would hope that it would be possible to help Muslims living in this country to understand the value of these ways of living, and that we're not asking them to give up their theology, but to understand how we can be tolerant of people we disagree with. But it's a big problem because if people have already instilled in them a sense of hate, and they've been taught to hate people who disagree with them, well, it's not going to work to get them to tolerate. And this
So,
is this is
yes,
a big
thanks.
challenge.
Thanks, Damien. If I can just comment, the Church of England has actually split over irreconcilable differences. So maybe it was a good example in history, but it's not a good example today. And that's with, a denomination within Christianity. When you have Islamic people who are opposed to infidels, how does that fit? And I'll just be very quick because Liana has raised their hand. Yep.
Yeah, look, I'd say when I talk about the Church of England, I talk about it the way it was set up. And yes,
Mm.
the problem with a settlement is sometimes it gets to a point that people can no longer tolerate the disagreements, and that's what we've seen in the Church of England, is the breakdown and the failure of the Church of England. It's we can talk about what's happened to Church of England. That my point is not looking at the Church of England now, but the way it started, and that it started as a compromise, and we had this tradition that yeah, that's really what I need to say about that. I can take I think Liana's got
Thank
a
you.
hand up.
Thank you. That's great, Liana.
I have raised my hand, but I haven't got a gadget to raise my hand. I've been waiting to have something to say.
You're welcome to go first, Dahlia. Be my guest.
All right. So thank you. I wish to thank Damien for your insight. Unfortunately, my insight is a bit different, and I would like to have this opportunity to probably express how I feel about the whole concept of anti-Semitism and hate in general in Australia, or specifically in Australia, not around the world. We're talking about Australia at the moment. So I feel that, like in other parts of the world, any conflict that's happening outside of Australia has never, ever been expressed within Australia, except for conflict between Israel and the Arab countries. Israel has a right to defend itself. And all these things of anti-Semitism within Australia started basically as a result in 82 of Israel and Lebanon conflict and the following Intifada and everything that's been happening since. So each time there's a conflict between Israel and Australia and the Arab countries, Israel has a right to defend itself, and that's what's happening most of the time. But the Arab world is, as you said, being seen as the oppressed and not the one who is attacking. And therefore, there is the hate element that you speak about, because we are the baddies and not the goodies. And I think the whole concept of anti-Semitism in my book, and I come from Holocaust survivors, so I know what this is about, it's got nothing to do with anti-Semitism. It's more about anti-Israel, anti-Zionism, and that is being taken as a general hate because anti-Semitism in Australia is basically presented by the Arabs who are using anti-Semitic signs and language against the Jewish people.
Yeah.
So
I think I'd make two observations about that.
sorry,
I'd
can I
make
just
two observations. The first observation, I don't think it's exactly true that this is the only time that a foreign conflict has ever sort of come into Australia. I think, for instance, the conflict between Ireland and Great Britain, I think that there was a sense that that was felt very strongly in this country, and you know that a lot about the conscription debates hinged a lot on how people thought about that. What was very different is it's not the case that the conflict never came into this country. It was the way it came in, and that we were in those days, it didn't descend into the kind of hatred that we now see. This is a quite different, the manifestation of this sort of hatred, I think, was different to the way it played out in the past. The other thing I just say about you, I agree with you about what's happening with you know, as I said, about the oppressed and the oppressor. But I would just say whether or not, I mean, one could reasonably disagree about the role of Israel in all of this. That the problem, I think, is not exactly whether or not Israel, whether Israel is the oppressor and the Palestinians are the oppressed, or whether it's the other way around. The problem is when you adopt that mindset, and yes, there are people overseas that want to persuade Australians that they should see it that the Arabs are the oppressed people and Israel is the oppressor. But the problem here is also we have allowed ourselves to get into a mindset where we're ready to accept this dichotomy of oppressed and oppressor. And the effect of that is that people then read say, oh well, if the world is consists of oppressed and oppressor, then Israel must be the oppressor. And the problem is we've got to really say, no, no, that's the wrong. You shouldn't see the world through the lens of oppressed and oppressor. You should see there are conflicts, but that doesn't always mean that the world consists of oppressed and oppressor. I can take one question from Liana, and then I'm afraid I am going to have to go. I can
Yeah,
see she's
we've
had
got
her hand up for
Denise
a
who's put
while.
her hand up as well. Okay, Diana.
I'm happy to take a back seat if somebody else wants to, but my quick question was, Damien, that I am so academically and intellectually confused by all of this, and maybe my academic learning is out of date, but I guess I matured on postmodernist theory, which taught us not to think in binaries, oppressed and oppressor, not or, but and. And so this oppressed and oppressor, binary thing is just flying in the face of what I thought was a really big and, progressive theoretical,
Mm.
framework of comment.
Yeah, well, I'm not saying that I mean, I'll be honest,
Yeah.
I've published on conservatism. I've written a lot of things, about Edmund Burke and why I think he's a good guide to politics, and I'm at heart a Burkean conservative. I
Hmm.
can understand that doesn't mean that I can't see any value in the way progressives approach things, but we have to see the reality, which is that this particular way of seeing the world in terms of oppressed and oppressor, that
Framing.
through
Yep.
critical race, that has taken over
Yep.
the
Get it.
academy. And this is
Yep.
a real that now there were choices to be made. And I would say to people, I think, by all means, you can be a progressive. By all means, you can see things differently. It doesn't mean, for instance, I would just say one thing is I think Catholic social teaching is one possibility that talks about, helping the poor. It understands that there's different, but it's a quite different. It doesn't say that the world is inextricably the oppressed and the oppressor, and the whole of society is a matter of is overthrowing the oppressed, overthrowing the oppressor. It's got a different way. I'm not saying it's got the right way, but it just is to say, well, that's a different way. I think progressives also, yeah, they can. I'm not saying all progressives need to embrace this critical race theory, but it has become prevalent, and it's permeated Australian politics even, and that's the problem, I think. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Did you want me to take one more question,
So
Barbara?
Denise, oh, that's lovely. Yes, Denise.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Hi there. There's a couple of things. Damien, how are you? Thank you for your time tonight. Two things. I actually don't want to be tolerated. I want to be accepted. And as a educationalist, I have taught the idea of acceptance rather than tolerance. So that for me is a really important distinction. And secondly, I'm not sure why we keep buying into this narrative around Palestinians because they're actually Jordanians. And questions need to be asked which are not being asked either by the media or anyone else. If the Hamas was so interested in looking after their people, why didn't they open their tunnels and let them into safety? There is a range of questions that are not being understood or even asked or even answered. I'm not sure what our way forward is from Bondi through the discussion that you've just had now. I think the biggest thing is around how do we talk about acceptance rather than tolerance, and that's a real concern for me. I just wanted to
Yeah,
share
look,
that
I
observation.
see, I get your point, the difference between acceptance and tolerance. And I think sometimes something like acceptance is definitely what's required. So, I think it's right that after Bondi, the
I mean,
Prime
it's
Minister,
always right.
well,
It's
no, I think
acceptance. You
the
can't just
point.
say sometimes it's right and sometimes it's not. You
No,
can't have it your way there.
sometimes we have
No?
to accept that people won't be able to get to the point of getting much beyond tolerating one another. And I think, the Church of England is an example here. We didn't need to, they just had to accept that, high church and low church, these disagreements, they could live with one another. And maybe you want to say I don't know that it quite gets to the point of acceptance. It's sometimes we just have to accept, sometimes what we have to accept is that there are very profound disagreements between us. And, I think I don't expect people, like, I don't expect, I'm not saying this is true of all gay people, but a lot of gay people, I wouldn't really expect them to accept the idea that there are some forms of Christianity out there that reject the idea of marriage between two people of the same sex. And I think now you can't expect them to just sort of, oh, we have to, at some point, what we've got to say is, look, as a society, both of you what you do have to accept is that you see the world very differently. One is never going to persuade the other how to see the world. You can't, we've got to prevent people from hating one another for that reason. But at the end of the day, we do have to accept sometimes that people can't get past seeing things differently, and they're entitled to see things differently within certain constraints, and we have to, as a society, be able to say, sometimes that's we can encourage people to, the more, of course, you go down the path of seeing difference is not something to be hated, the more you can cultivate within children a sense that they should embrace difference. Yeah, you can do that. And I'm not saying you shouldn't have that as an aspiration, but as a society, we also just have to accept that there are fundamental disagreements, and it's okay sometimes that people fundamentally disagree because
100%. That's
Okay, well, I
exactly
guess,
what it is. Acceptance of disagreements or acceptance of differences. 100%. Yeah,
okay,
thank you.
so, sorry, Denise, you finished? Okay, so look, we have kept Damien longer than what he had planned. So I would like to thank him very much for his contribution tonight, and also comment that with regard to the Special Envoy against anti-Semitism, ASTECA, that Damien works with Gillian Siegel, one of the things that happened after the sad events at Bondi is that her report had waited 6 months for a response from the government. At least after Bondi, tragic though it was, the government was finally moved to do something about accepting the report and getting some action happening around it. So we do look forward to the practical outcomes of the envoy's report and the wonderful work Damien is doing to assist with that. So thank you so much, Damien, and all the best with your travels.
I'm glad to have been able to join you tonight.
Thanks, Damien.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks very much. So we now have Dr. Mike Kelly, and I will just give you a little introduction. So Dr. Mike Kelly's current role is adjunct professor at the National Security Institute of the University of Canberra. Mike is one of the founding co-conveners of the Labor Friends of Israel in Australia, established in 2023. He served in the Australian Army, including deployments in Somalia, Bosnia, Timor-Leste, Iraq, and a hostage recovery mission in Africa. So he served as Director of UN NATO Europe Peacekeeping, the Middle East and Africa in the ADF Strategy Group, including managing the crises in Timor-Leste and Lebanon in 2006. Absolutely amazing CV. So we're very grateful to have him, but there's more. Mike was a member of the Australian Parliament, serving as Assistant Minister for Defence, including responsibility for the transition of operations in Afghanistan and as Minister for Defence Material. He was also a member of the Parliamentary Joint Committee on Intelligence and Security. So we are very, very blessed. This is the second time we've had Dr. Kelly on our Indigenous Friends of Israel Zooms, and we are very happy to welcome him back. So over to Mike.
Thanks, Barbara and Norman. Yeah, I'm not sure you were obviously beggars for punishment getting me back a second time, but could I thank you guys particularly too, as the Indigenous Friends of Israel. You guys have been worthy custodians of the heritage of William Cooper, keeping that torch bright and shining through all of this, and also, you know, in the context of all the things that our Indigenous people have had to endure, that they take an interest in the suffering of the Jewish community in Australia and the issues around Israel is just a real tribute to their open-heartedness. So I really wanted to make that point. And particularly in the context, it must be so galling to see these characters like Nasser Mashni trying to appropriate the Indigenous story and create this, you know, the Indigenous flag and Palestinian flag pin. And it's just completely indicative of their approach to how they push this extremist cause of theirs, which is not only to try and appropriate that kind of story as an entry point into the progressive side of society in Australia, but how they try to flip the narrative of the Jewish story. And this whole campaign they have been running around trying to sell that Gaza has been a genocide, in inverted commas, because they know that, you know, the whole Holocaust story was definitely a big factor in the ability of Israel to be reborn. And also, you know, they believe then if we can cast ourselves in the light of being the ones who the Holocaust and the genocide has been perpetrated against, then, you know, we will flip that whole story and etc. So to understand that too is to understand where we need to go next, because the trajectory that we were on that got us to Bondi was completely predictable and apparent. We were saying from the start, I and many others, once the original sin of not policing that illegal demonstration to the Opera House, where on the best construction of it, they were chanting, "Where's the Jews?" and "F the Jews." Well, what do people think that was about? They were down there hunting Jews. It would have been another pogrom. And that wasn't policed. And every time authorities stood back from every escalation that happened, it simply encouraged them to take things to another level. And we were saying, you know, well, the next thing that's going to happen after this vandalism and the desecration of our war memorials, etc., is there's going to be synagogues burning. And then if there are synagogues burning, then there won't be a very great leap beyond that to the loss of life. And we saw the Director General of ASIO comment on the fact that that was the most prominent threat to life was Islamist extremism in Australia. So all of those warning signs were out there and they failed to be acted upon. So that trajectory was built upon also this long-standing information warfare campaign and the incredibly well-resourced organisations that have been carrying that effort forward, and assisted and amplified by the interference of state foreign actors from overseas that have searched for ways to undermine liberal democracies and search for fault lines to exploit. And I'll come back to that point. So then we end up, of course, with the situation in Bondi. And in the run-up to that, you know, 3 months beforehand, you have Bob Carr going on the fundamentalist extremist One Path media outlet, which is also well-funded, and directly attacking the Australian Jewish community. And the themes that he enunciated were straight recycling of some of the oldest anti-Semitic tropes. You could go back to the Protocols, the Elders of Zion, and then in particular, almost word for word, the stuff you will see in Mein Kampf. A few weeks later, we see the neo-Nazis in front of New South Wales Parliament holding up a banner directly echoing the comments of Bob Carr. And then a few weeks later, we have Bondi. And of course, these two persons, the perpetrators, avid consumers of that kind of material. And as I've talked about often in the context of the Royal Commission, what we were seeing is the manifestation of the ecosystem of terrorism. And it's a misunderstanding today to talk about, look for always an old model of terrorism that's built on cells that are under a hierarchical structure and that operate in accordance with methods that might involve hostage taking or aircraft hijacking, and that will be obvious in terms of who might else be involved as a part of that organisation. These days, it's a disaggregated terrorism structure largely. You still may see examples of the old style of terrorism, but now it's about creating mass casualties, about just getting out there and killing as many people as you can by whatever means you can. And obviously based on that ecosystem having an arm's length posture so that people like Wissam Haddad can get in there and poison the minds of younger Palestinian refugee people in the broader context of the Hizb ut-Tahrir world, and in Australia, just any Muslim they can get their hands on that they can disaffect, disorient, and radicalise in their process. And that was obviously very successful individuals. And so we've sat back and watched all this happen, not just over the last 2 years, but over decades. When I had the Middle East desk in Strategy Group, I tracked over $7 billion coming into our region alone from great resources of personal oil wealth in the Middle East, funding radical madrasas and terrorist movements like Jama'ah Islamiyah, and also infiltrating our tertiary sector. And, this is part of this information warfare battle. It's also built on poisoning the younger generation as they come through and stealing their minds. So, you have the situation in the United States where Qatar has invested over $100 billion over these last couple of decades, really infiltrating the tertiary sector. But in testimony before the US Congress just recently, it's surfaced that they've also been working on years K to 12 in the US. And now we've had the revelations recently of these teachers for Palestine. And it's horrifying what they're doing, purloining, Bluey and Bingo, holding up signs of river to the sea. It's the same sort of material I could show you from Nazi textbooks and how they use their and then there was an audio recording of these teachers having a conversation, how they would propagandize our kids. And one of the leaders of that discussion was a maths teacher saying, oh yes, I'm going to use the Hamas statistics in my maths class, etc. I could show you pages from Nazi textbooks, from their maths textbooks, exactly the same theory, conditioning Germans into accepting euthanasia of the disabled and eradication of Jews. So, what we have to then do post-Bondi is a complete unpacking and reversal and an awareness of how this intentional and deliberative strategy works. And so, we saw a wonderful awakening. I mean, I think with Bondi, the Australian security bubble was burst. That safe space of Bondi, that cultural, iconic place of living life to the full and being welcoming on our shores where our migrants have been received, destroyed in one moment and stained forever by what happened. And they reacted in large numbers. Over 50,000 Australians voted with their feet and their blood in support of the Australian Jewish community. And that was incredibly moving, and it was replicated in all the organisations that represent Australia, calling for a Royal Commission. And we have that Royal Commission now. The government was forced to accept the will of the Australian people in that respect. I do worry that the person they've chosen to lead it has no expertise, experience or knowledge in any aspect of what happened at Bondi. I was hoping they would form a panel, much like we did with the Veterans Royal Commission, where we had Nick Caldas, who I served with in Iraq, who was a great head of that process, supported by a psychiatrist and supported by a legal expert. What I'm hoping is that Dennis Richardson in his security review gets rolled into the Royal Commission when he's completed his work in April and carries on through to December. And I've had a long meeting with Dennis Richardson because one of the key factors in why Bondi happened, it really relates to the capability of our intelligence agencies right now. And that is, quite frankly, a disgrace where we sit right now. And I was deep in the bowels of this beast, for 4 years after I left Parliament and working with our agencies. And we were trying to work towards equipping them with the latest state-of-the-art tools. And when you're involved in this counter-terrorism battle, it's like looking for a needle in a haystack often. And it's about processing and consuming and analysing and delivering actionable intelligence out of petabytes worth of data. But you have to actually contribute to building that base by actually digitising the data points out there that are critical in our landscape. So when someone goes off and buys half a dozen firearms, that needs to pop up on a system that connects that person to a person of interest. And in this case, we had that bright red thread of someone who had already been identified as ideated by ISIS and already in that headspace. But our agencies didn't have the horsepower to keep the monitoring regime going in relation to that situation. And that's where the technology comes in. It helps you overcome that lack of horsepower. And so we should be having all of these issues and data points that are critical, networked and digitized, and so that you have then the ability to apply these state-of-the-art tools, the AI-powered tools that will do all that dot joining for our agencies. And so they'll be sitting there in front of their screens and there will be alerts that will pop up that will tell them, Joe Bloggs went and bought 6 firearms. He's the father of X. These people have travelled to the southern Philippines. These people are buying precursor materials for explosive devices, all of these things. And the reason why our agencies couldn't deploy these state-of-the-art tools was because their infrastructure was out of date. They didn't have the computing power to host this stuff. So government wasn't providing them with the ability to cure that problem and then actually procure the tools. So one of the agencies I was working with had to adopt a 3-year timeline to get to the point where they could deploy those tools. They've still got over another year to go. If they'd have had those tools when they wanted them, something like Bondi would have been prevented. So hopefully we see that addressed, in this process that's ahead of us. And Dennis Richardson, I've had a long conversation with, so I know he will be onto that part of it. But, we had some comments surface tonight too around, this issue of the broader context of progressive society in inverted commas. And just 2 examples of that I think illustrate a lot of this. One was that horrendous Kathy Wilcox cartoon that was straight out of the pages of Der Stürmer, where she was saying people like me, we're has-beens and we're also being manipulated by Benjamin Netanyahu. And a dog there holding up a sign as part of the group calling for a Royal Commission saying, don't mention the war, as if like the war is a justification for what happened at Bondi, and always trying to draw this link between what's going on in the Middle East and justifying what might happen to your fellow Australian citizens, 55 of them being shot on our soil, somehow rationalising that through this cartoon. Just a disgraceful effort, on her part. If you unpack every element of that cartoon, it should never have been published. But the other one that really shocked me here is I had a colleague in Labour Friends of Israel who was engaging in correspondence with a senior ABC radio journalist, and I won't mention that person's name because it was private correspondence, but it really should be more widely known. But in any event, he was having an argument with my colleague over a piece my colleague wrote in the AFR on Israel, and he replied to my colleague by saying, because my colleague was raising this anti-Semitism and hate speech stuff, and particularly, there was a comment by some that my colleague was related, saying the Jews are a cruel people. And this ABC journalist responded, and his exact words were, "It's perfectly legitimate to call the Jews a cruel people." That's a senior ABC journalist, right? So this is the infection, within our mainstream media, our progressive society is illustrated well by those instances. So when you see the combination of the erosion of our kids' state of mind, and this information warfare effort is being really highly orchestrated amongst Russia, Iran, China, and North Korea, who have aligned after the Russians showed what could be achieved in the 2016 US election. Then the rest of these autocratic sort of tight-knit supporters who are mutually supporting each other understood they could achieve great things in undermining their opponents by dividing them internally, social division, and bringing down liberal democracies. And they've been assiduously at that for the last 10 years. So the VDEM Institute at Gothenburg University highlighted in their research of democracies, which they've been doing for decades, that in the last 10 years, we've gone from 48% of the world's population living under autocracies to, as we sit here today, it's now 71%, and that there are only 13% of us left living in liberal democracies. So they will look for any fault line they can. In the US, it was easy with the race issues and gaps in wealth, etc. In Australia, it was harder, but the Middle East offered that great opportunity. And so they particularly targeted the progressive society and our kids. So effectively, we have a big job in front of us when it comes to education, coming back to that. And, we must equip our kids with critical thinking and with the ability to do source evaluation effectively. And some private schools are doing that already now. And also, I believe that our government, when it comes to this social media thrust that they're employing, I know there are 3 projects that the US Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency is pursuing. One of them is called the Influence Campaign Awareness and Sense Making project. The other is a Modeling Influence Pathways project. And then there's another one that zeroes in on the deep fake AI stuff that's going on in social media. We should be seeking to actively collaborate with the US and drag the UK into this too as part of AUKUS, as part of Pillar 2. So, that's a serious threat to our country. It's an existential threat to liberal democracies that we must unite to confront. And anti-Semitism is a central feature of that. It has always been a central feature of how Russian active measures campaigns that are all this is based on, always pursued throughout their history. And I'll just sort of wrap up with talking quickly about the hate speech laws. Obviously, it's a fraught area to try and dive into this, but there are some obvious examples that I'm sure the courts will test. When you look at what Wissam Haddad and Hizbut Tahrir say, and the speeches and preaching that they do, it's clearly incitement to hatred and violence. And this is what globalize the Intifada means. But the main result out of this hate speech laws is that it enables the government now to go after and proscribe organisations like Hizbut Tahrir and the Muslim Brotherhood. They should have probably amended the terrorism laws well before now to enable them to do that instead of going down this road. As an example, the UK stepped forward on Hizbut Tahrir over 2 years ago already under their terrorism laws. That was out there as an example. And oh, by the way, all of the Middle East basically has outlawed Hizbut Tahrir, including the Palestinian Authority. So, the fact that, and most of the Western democracies too, that we compare ourselves with. So it's been shameful that the government has allowed this to fester for at least the last 2 years without taking more serious action. But those hate speech laws now enable that to happen. I'm looking forward to hopefully seeing that happen, because if it doesn't, then, I don't know how the government would expect to maintain its credibility and security if it doesn't. And, I guess on the question of immigration, we do need to revisit that. I mean, the Islamic world is going through this crisis like the Reformation, where you've got a battle for the soul of Islam. And while that's going on, we're going to be dealing with this Islamist extremist element for some time. And I'm not saying that you ban all Muslims from immigration to Australia, but what we need to do is institute an extremely forensic and careful process of evaluating each individual that comes to this country, and be very careful with the steps you take along the visa path in terms of making them permanent, etc. And finally, just on that education piece, this Holocaust Education Centre project that we're working on in the ACT really is something that I think gives us a big opportunity, unique in Australia, and that we have 165,000 kids that come here every year from all over the country, many of whom don't go to the Sydney and Melbourne museums because they, you need to be, it's very hard to organise groups and go by bus to some of these venues. So we have this wonderful opportunity here, and I'm really hoping that people can get behind helping us raise the funds to deliver this thing, as I think there's something that will be incredibly impactful for the battle, the long-term battle for the future of defeating the process of othering and demystifying Jews and Judaism. So I'll leave it there and just to open up for questions. I think you're on mute there, Barb.
Okay. So look, thanks, Mike. That, your wealth of experience and your knowledge is incredible, and we are truly grateful to have heard from you. So we have Denise Archie first, and then we have Amanda Wright. And I see we've got a couple more coming up as well. So actually, we've got quite a few here. So if you want to start, Denise.
Sure. And I'll just keep it really concise. Hi, Mike. How are you?
Hey, Denise. Good to see you, mate.
Yeah, good to see you too. Thank you so much. As always, really informative and fantastic. I guess for me, the question is, what are some steps that we can take to manage some of the relentless bombardment of this social media? I know with, the different groups that we've got, and we're doing lots of things. We've got this keffiyeh, tea towel wearing thing on Friday that the teachers have said, can you do that? We have the different groups. What are some actions that all the people who are here now, what is one action if everybody does, such as maybe they ring a radio station and just have a general conversation? I don't know. What's the one action that all of us here could do? Because I know some people are feeling really, they want to do something, but they don't know what to do. So over to you.
Yeah, so I mean, the radio stations are great, and you get onto 2GB, and they've been fantastic in having me on. And that gives quite a significant demographic. But the real battle is with our kids, and that's got to be social media based, not the radio stations. It's where they're getting their news from, and they don't even go looking for their news on it. The only news they digest is what they bump on social media, incidentally. And TikTok and all these others have deliberate algorithmic approaches which are attacking Israel, effectively undermining Israel and the narrative around that. As I spoke to an expert, Melissa Chen, about the technology they use to achieve that. So I mentioned how the government should approach this with getting technically involved in that battle. But as each individual, we all have the ability. We have the ability to engage. I know it's sometimes scary because God knows I've been hit every single day with, the most incredible invective, character assassination, and death threats, So, but you just have to just ignore it and battle on. Just treat it like the garbage that is. And every time they do that, when you're putting facts out there, they're running up the white flag. They can't argue with you on the facts. So I always take it as a win. But everybody can engage on social media. And the other thing is yeah, and the podcast that I'm been running for a while now, Denise, we need to get the subscriber numbers up on that. So if people could just hit the subscribe button on that Frontlines and Fault Lines podcast, we will be able, and it costs nothing to do that.
Why don't you put the link into the chat so everybody on tonight can actually do that.
Yep. Before we finish up, I'll try and do that.
Yeah. And
But
the other
that's
thing is, if anybody wants to be part of the group to help with Barbara and Norman, please put it in the chat, your email, because we'll do a collection of those things and we'll put you in our list to actually encourage and some of the things that you can do to support what's going on for the small groups that are working. So
I think Mike actually put it up front. He said he's looking for funding for the Holocaust Centre, so he was quite clear about that right up front.
Yeah, there's that as well. But this with the social media thing is if people can, help subscribe there. What it means is eventually, if you get to 1,000 subscribers, you actually get a line of revenue, and that enables me. I've got these group of volunteers. Like the Frontlines and Faultlines podcast itself is designed for a more academic audience. But what these guys who helped me do, and they came from the NAIN group, Susanna Wild, etc., they get out there and work their butts off, cutting it up into reels and enabling it for social media sort of exposure. So I at some point, I'm going to need to be able to sustain them and pay them in what they're doing. If people, all they need to do is just subscribe, and then we'll be right. So I'd encourage that, and to encourage your friends and family, etc., and all that.
Okay, that's absolutely fantastic. And so yes, we've got 1.3 K on our Indigenous Friends of Israel social media as well. So please pop on there and like and comment. So now we have Amanda, and then Jenny, and then Ilana, and then Luke. And I thought I saw Dahlia put her hand up, but it's not coming up as yellow. No, she's shaking her head. Okay, Amanda next.
Thank you for everything and your knowledge and everything you're doing. I just wanted to ask, I can't see you now because I've been put in my thing on. I just wanted to ask you, tomorrow, I'm on Magnetic Island, Townsville, and tomorrow we have the Justice, Integrity and Community Safety Committee coming to, can you put Mike on the screen as well so I can see him? I feel like I'm talking to myself.
I can see you and hear you, Amanda. Good.
Pardon?
I can see you and hear you, Amanda. It's all good.
Okay, that'd be nice to see you though, and I can't find you again. Anyway, they're coming supposedly to hear our submissions to the committee about our experiences with anti-Semitism. But the committee's inquiry is into fighting anti-Semitism and keeping guns out of the hands of terrorists and criminals, Amendment Bill 2026. So they're two different things as far as I'm concerned. I mean, obviously, we don't want terrorists to have guns, but that's not the same as fighting anti-Semitism. That's like helping to prevent those that the terrorists hate getting killed. And so I just wanted your opinion on that, because I don't know, and with all due respect, I have a great trust of politicians. And I just feel like maybe their agenda is more about the gun lobby than it is about actually fighting anti-Semitism.
Yeah, it was a bit of a shame that the government came out of the gate straight focusing on that. I mean, it's great that we're taking on that issue, because frankly, we can't even get a firearms register nationally up and running, which should have been done ages ago. And that comes back to the technology again too, which exists and they haven't deployed. But you need to know what's going on out there with weapons, and people who shouldn't be getting them shouldn't be getting them. But you're right. The main thing here is anti-Semitism and how we fight that battle. And it's a process of othering that is, and I hate it when the Prime Minister gets up and says this is thousands of years old, because he's kind of like hiding behind the fact that, oh, it's not my fault, and it's been around and we're never going to get rid of it. No, we've got a special dynamic that's in place at the moment where this has been amplified terribly, and as I say, it's appearing through these social media threads. So the schools are really the front line in all of that. It's no use just banning 16-year-olds from social media, because they will find ways around that. It's about the content, and finding ways and forcing the companies to help you regulate that. and deal with it. And AI platforms now give you the power to do that more effectively, and they're just not deploying that technology. But if you've got teachers out there who are actually propagandizing our kids, it's the opposite. You're creating the opposite dynamic. So, these teachers for Palestine in New South Wales and Victoria, what are their governments doing about that? These people should be getting sacked for putting this material out there. It's just outrageous, so disciplinary action there, but also I've seen the Catholic system, really take this to heart. And so they're getting in there and making it part of the curricula that you bring in an imam and a rabbi and a priest, and you join the dots on the Abrahamic faiths and the true, heritage of the fact that Judaism is the source of these faiths, and that you should respect that. In the first 2 centuries of Christianity, they're basically all sharing the same synagogues and only really disagreed on the Mashiach principle and whatnot. But the unpacking all of this and then demystifying, and that's why with the Holocaust Centre that what we want to do is start with giving the kids the Jewish cultural experience so they understand that, meet a Jew, which a lot of them from such remote parts will never do. And then you talk about that, the process of the Holocaust and how it happened and how democracy became a dictatorship and how these process of laws developed and etc., and unpack all of that. So, it's a deep, long battle that has to be fought, and we need to get started.
But so in terms of my question about this committee tomorrow, how would you suggest would be the best way to get that message across to them that, the whole point of fighting anti-Semitism has to be separate from the gun lobby? I mean, how would you tackle it, like from politicians?
Well, I just put it to them. Do you want to win this battle? Do you want to protect your fellow Australians or not? How many times do we want to see 55 Australians shot in one afternoon? It's about what was going on in that shooter's mind. How does, and I've made this point a lot, how does that the younger of the 2 shooters look down the scope, a telescopic scope on his rifle at a 10-year-old little girl running towards her mother and shoot her dead? Yeah. How does someone's mind get warped to that point? And it's the same process that enabled Hamas to slaughter, mutilate, sexually mutilate, gratuitously, etc., kill babies, the whole thing. It's that battle of the mind. So ask them to focus on that and where that starts, and get into get the parents to raise this with their schools as well.
Very good advice. We have to move on. We've got Jenny now, and then we've got Ilana, and then Luke, and then Dahlia. So can we hear from Jenny? Thank you.
Thanks, Barbara. Mike, thank you so much. It was wonderful. One aspect I'd like to speak on is at the Opera House after the October the 23rd incident in Israel, and the Muslims were there on the steps of the Opera House, and everyone knows what happened there. But the thing is, since then, a lot of people have been blaming the police. I'm an ex-policewoman, and I can tell you right now that came from government orders. This is not, the police only act when the government allow them to act, and they can't even enforce the laws in any state or nation unless they've got the government's go-ahead. And I'd say there must have been, they were spoken to go soft. And, you can speculate why that is, and I've got my own conclusion on that. But rather than blaming the police, I wrote to the Minister of Police and warned her what would happen in the future if they ignored what happened on that night. And, of course, that was just whitewashed. So I just think for people, as a mass group of people, and everyone get them to write to their politicians, because honestly, if you blitz them and don't let up, that's going to be one way of stopping a lot of this rot, because unless the government comes against this, and the nations where they have not allowed this, that's carrying on in our nation right now, when the governments have kicked out people and have forbid them to do the things they're doing, then we will see it stop in Australia. But it'll need a tough government to do it. And all you can do is pray about that one and vote accordingly. Thank you so much, Mike. Any comments?
Yeah, just really quick, Jen, thanks for your service, first of all. And I hear you on the police. I've been serving alongside police for, well over 40 years. And so you're right. I can tell you exactly what the theory was because I was still working with the agencies at the time. And the theory generally, including the agencies in Canberra, was that let's just let this go through to the keeper. Let's not pour kerosene on this. It'll all blow over. If we act now, it'll just, amplify it. And so that was the attitude they took all through all this, they weren't taking it seriously enough. They weren't seeing the escalation and the trajectory and how it was being exploited. And you've just seen that now in this demonstration in Sydney. They deliberately went out to cause a scene. And it's so obvious because you can contrast it with the 30,000 beautiful Iranian, Persian people who straight afterwards have done their demonstration in coordination with the police, like the police offered to that Propel crew, could have had their march, could have had it all go peacefully and beautifully, and they chose to make it a scene for propaganda purposes. And the contrast with that Iranian demonstration is just bells the cat on all that. But the police are always the ones who get stuck, at the front line, getting their abuse, insults, and violence against them.
And the trouble is what it's done, it's actually eroded the police force because they haven't been able to do their jobs, and that erodes faith in the government. Thank you, Mike.
That's right. So we're going on to Alana now. Thank you, Jenny and Mike.
Hi, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yep, all good.
Sorry, I don't feel like turning the camera on. Mike, I've listened to you a few times on a few different Zooms and some Sky News interviews. And what stood out for me is, this is sort of a bit more of a personal question in a way. So what stood out for me is your moral clarity, your strength, your support of the Jewish people is very strong. I can really feel that, you're, there's a real sense of gratitude for me that someone like yourself is holds such a strength of support and clarity. And so I'm just wondering, for you personally, I'm curious what you think or what your answer would be to what you think in your life, from your childhood, maybe your education, your work, whether in defence or for the government, or what is it that you think, or is it a personal characteristic? Is it spirituality or a combination of all of these things that's contributed to your particular stance and your relationship with this?
Yeah, I guess the simple answer is I just can't stand irrationality or injustice. And it's something that's been embedded in my family's history because every generation of my family served in the army. And so the stories that are passed down of how the Jewish community, the Yishuv in the Middle East, in Eretz Israel, looked after our serving personnel in 2 world wars, and so beautifully. They created a whole sort of welfare program for tens of thousands of Australian soldiers who are exceptionally grateful for that. And if you read the war diaries of the 7th Division and how they were so impressed and grateful for that support, they all chipped in the tin and bought pianos for the kibbutzim that they were being hosted by, etc. in World War II. It's just been passed down, and it was why the Labor government at the time supported Israel. But just being there so many times over the years and understanding the truth behind a lot of these things, Israel's not perfect, how perfect is Australia, and how many of these progressives are going to hand their homes back to the Indigenous population, etc. There was no birth certificate for creation of Australia, but there's just the double standards that get applied to Israel all the time, and I was heavily involved in a lot of our wars, and particularly the siege of Mosul, where we engaged in that siege in exactly the same way the IDF has had to engage in Gaza, only they've applied far higher standards of preserving the civilian population than we were able to or did. You know, it was a 9-month siege against only 12,000 ISIS fighters, and yet we flattened 40,000 buildings, including, you know, mosques and hospitals that were compromised. 10,000 civilians were killed, 1.5 million people displaced, and everybody understood it was this evil of ISIS needed to be eliminated. And I was just in Israel last November in a part of a council of military leaders, and again, that was intensely emotional, actually, for military people to go and visit these sites and talk to surviving people, you know, both civilian and military. And just the young IDF service people, so impressive, proud of their country, understand the fight they're fighting on our behalf, the courage they've demonstrated, and in particular, the young women at one of these observation posts who, 700 metres from the fence, were observing and watching on their monitors hundreds of these Hamas terrorists descending in a whole battalion of them in waves and continuing to do their duty to the very last moment.
Thank you very much.
Yes, very emotional, and we know how incredibly respected you are in Israel, Mike. So thank you for that. We have Luke Webb next.
Thank you, Barbara. Good evening, Mike. Thank you very much for your remarks and your insights. And there's probably about 10 questions I'd like to fire at you. Maybe we'll just go for 2. You made some remarks in the middle of your piece around what some private schools are up to in terms of helping students kind of really zone in on sources behind news and other critical thinking capabilities. I wonder if you could reflect on that, and if you can then perhaps take that up to, imagine you're back in Parliament as Education Minister.
Yep.
What kind of things would you put in place to really help with? It's a combination of a national resilience piece, strategic shock piece, national coherence or societal coherence. What kind of programs, initiatives, policies would you consider putting forward, particularly through the education portfolio?
Yeah, well, I like what the Catholic system's done with this process of, you know, defeating othering, you know, and understanding other cultures and respecting them. But also, you know, I think we have to have as part of our national curricula these standards. But so I was at Marici College in Canberra a while back, and I asked the staff and the kids about this, you know, and they had this active program of unpacking this whole social media dynamic and really teaching them and inoculating them against, you know, that assault on them, that barrage that they've been under, and evaluating it properly and understanding what it's about. You know, so I thought that was really effective. But, you know, as I say, that needs to be standardized. If we're teaching kids anything at the moment, because the knowledge engines they have out there to acquire whatever information they need, schools have to be all about cognitive capability and their ability to analyze, you know, and imagine. That's where their futures in the workplace are going to be. And in particular, you know, then to reinforce the health of our own society, it's incumbent on us to really systematize this approach with the best science and learnings. And that's why I was so impressed with what the Melbourne Holocaust Museum did with their hidden exhibition, targeted those kids between the ages of 11 and 14 in an accessible and appropriate way. And the end point of it is they have a learning centre where they just focus on the character traits and values that we want to instill in our kids. And they take the lessons from that process as an iterative thing, how they can improve every time. That should be going on in every school, frankly, but we aim to do that hopefully with our Holocaust Centre as well.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
We now have Dahlia.
Okay, first of all, Michael, thank you. I mean, you touched my heart, I must say. I share my life between Israel and Australia, and I did. I lived in Australia for many years and dealt with advocacy. And being aware of the history, which is Australia being there for the partition plan, the first to vote for the establishment of a Jewish state alongside an Arab state, which was denied by the Arabs, and hence the independence war, etc. And we are at war ever since, right, with the Arab countries surrounding us. And when living in Australia, of course, I'm part of Australia. I'm very proud of Australia and the achievements, and always felt as an Australian, for we are all the same, we are all one. And that's one concept that I always keep, that we have all the same rights to protect ourselves without actually having a conflict outside there affecting our lives within our country, Australia. That should not be happening at all. And I really live by that. And so when I see what's happening today, I'm very disturbed. I think yes, education is part of it, but we also have to protect our rights as Australians and be really confident that the Australian government and the Australian people understand the concept that, okay, we have one Jewish country in this whole world, right? Which of course we are associated with because it's our history. It's not only our history, it's the history of the Christians, it's the history of the Arabs, it's the history for everyone around us. So I think it's really important. So when I hear the Australian anthem, which says we are all good by sea in Australia, I think of our little country, Israel, which is good by enemies that want to throw us into the sea. And all the right to protect it. And no one should get, say that we are wrong when people want to fight us or to destroy us, to send us into the sea. And the other thing, which I'm very proud of, and you would know that the Israeli airplanes are guarding the borders of Australia.
Yep.
Right. So no one knows how we contribute to Australia as a country. But how everyone is shouting and screaming at Israel and using that excuse for rising anti-Semitism when it is not. And that's what I think. It's always a result of a conflict between Israel and the Arab country, which brings it. And that's what I'm trying to always say. The longer you will call it anti-Semitism, the longer it will stay. And we allowed the Nazis to come out on the street and not even being stopped for demonstrating, which is against the law, by the way, right? So these are the things that I, as a person who lives in these two countries and respect both at the same level. I mean, this is my homeland. My parents are Holocaust survivors. And when they what's happening in Australia, anti-Semitism, and let it grow and grow and grow when you're not really addressing the core problem.
It's and like the key problem in our country is with the so-called progressive sector at the moment, which is shocking. Like my wife and I put up a motion at our last branch meeting, looking for just to pass a condolence motion to the Australian Jewish community. Didn't mention the Middle East at all, and I thought it was going to be uncontroversial, that people in the context of what happened would wave it through and all get behind it. But no, it became a really hot debate. One person immediately tried to amend it and said, well, we need to have something in there that grieves to the 70,000 Gazans slaughtered, by Israel, etc. And so I said to her, look, if I'd have proposed a motion of condolence for the 50 Muslims killed in New Zealand, and I wanted to then include a caveat saying, but we condemn the Muslim attack on the World Trade Center and the Muslim slaughter of Christians in Iraq, you would say I'm blaming the New Zealand Muslims for everything that is done by, Muslims worldwide, etc. Would be incredibly inappropriate. But no, she thought this was perfectly appropriate, and it's just so hard. They've passed hundreds of motions condemning Israel for all sorts of things. And
may I just add, where was the world in Lebanon with the Lebanon war, when they're killing each other? Where was the world? In Syria? They were killing the Palestinians in hundreds of thousands, and in Jordan and everyone.
Sudan, across North Africa. Yeah. I mean, it's Natan Sharansky's 3D anti-Semitism, you know, sort of delegitimization, demonization, and double standards. But, you know, I will say that Israel has been responsible for saving a lot of Australian lives. In 2017, when I was still in Parliament, they gave us the intelligence that enabled us to stop a plot to bring down a plane at Sydney Airport that would have killed 400 souls. And when I was working in defence, we were getting all kinds of assistance from Israel and material from them that kept our people alive and safe. Force protection technologies. Still today, the Hawkeye protected mobility vehicle depends on the collaboration with Plasan in Israel, etc. So, you know, it's just. But what offends me most is these progressives don't understand that the one progressive country you have in the entire Middle East is the one that you want to destroy. And the one example I give, and I'll finish with this, is that, you know, there are 2 NGOs dedicated to nothing but looking after Palestinian gays who flee the West Bank and Gaza. At any given moment, there'll be 2,000 of them being sheltered in Tel Aviv and Netanya. And they find safe places for them to go in the world. One of these was a young guy, 25-year-old Ahmed Bakia, who was going to go to Canada, I believe. And then he went back to Hebron, I think, to say goodbye to, you know, his lover. And he was seized and beheaded. And including, you know, had this open hostility from his family, who denied, you know, that any homosexuals lived in Hebron because it's a holy city. And, you know, the attitudes that you will find everywhere else in the Middle East no way match the progressivism that exists in Israel. If you want to be on the side of forcing people to accept diversity and to progress the principles of women's rights, gay rights, free trade unionism, democracy, there's one team you should be getting behind, you idiots.
Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Dahlia and Mike. We have one more. John Aikens, can you ask your question, please? Oh, and we have someone called Karen by the looks of it.
Look, yeah, last year I'm a member of Never Again now, and that we had a billboard and a poster with an Aussie Jewish soldier, and saying, look, they've stood for us, we should stand with them now. Basically, that's what it said. I rang up the local RSL, can I put some on your reception desk at Anzac Day? And they said, oh, look, we'll need to get approval higher up. Is there any possible way, do you know, because you've been a returned soldier, and I don't know how well you know the RSL, is there any way that I can contact higher up so we can just put some posters on the reception desk?
Yeah, I've just actually finally caved into a request to be on this RSL National Security Committee, and the head of the National RSL at the moment is a good guy named Pete Tinley, who I knew really well, is an ex-SAS guy who was involved in calling out for a Royal Commission as well. So I'm looking forward to engaging with him about this as well, and surfacing our history. And I've got a podcast coming up that I'll air around Anzac Day, which unpacks the relationship between Australia and Israel and surfaces all of this story with, you know, the images to go with it. So look out for that coming up around April 24th, around that time.
Okay, look, if I email Barbara, she could forward on to you, and I can just show you the fly. And if
please.
Yeah, then, you know, like I honestly feel deep down, people, the average Australian actually has sympathy for the Jews, and they like problems being imported into this country.
Yep.
I honestly think in the long term, they are doing themselves a disservice, and we've just got to keep doing the right thing. And I'm hoping eventually this will turn.
Australians know this. I mean, when I was a member for Eden-Monaro and I'd Dornoch and Queanbeyan, which is like a microcosm of the country, during the ISIS situation, I remember the first door I went to, there's a woman there and she said, "Oh, yeah, g'day, Mike. Husband and I are Labor voters. Husband's not here at the moment. He's off at an anti-Muslim rally." And it was unfortunate. It was kind of like generic, but every second house I went to, policemen, teachers, they know that the Jewish community isn't out there stabbing or beheading or burning mosques or churches or temples. So they know that Australian Jews have been incredible contributors to this country and loyal, patriotic citizens who've served every time they've been called on in numbers greater than their proportion to the population. We need to surface those stories more. And
I think it's about 7,000 have served.
Yeah.
And several hundred have been killed.
Yeah.
So I will send you the flyer.
Yep, including our greatest soldier in John Monash.
That's right, of course.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Okay, thank you so much for that, John and Mike. Look, I thought I saw someone called Karen, but I can't see her now, but we do have Denise. Can we make that the last one? Because it's 7:41 here, probably 8:41 where many of you are. And it's been awesome. So over to Denise. Denise Archie, last question.
Thank you, Mike, and thank you, Norma and Barbara, for organising all of this. Mike, two things that have come out of tonight is really about the human rights issue and that Jewish people have been separated out of the whole Australian human rights issue. How do we actually raise that as a concern? And in answer to the police, we were able to access the freedom of information down in the Victorian Police, who were told to go soft on the easy targets, which were Jewish people, and because the police were sick of being spat at and kicked and punched. So the two things that I want to know is, how do we raise this as a human rights issue? The civil liberties is one area that people can go to. As I said, I'm very passionate about action. And I got some people to join the civil liberties, which are very connected to the group, that Arab group of network, or Palestinians, which
IPAN.
Yeah. And so if people can go to their local civil liberties, there's an AGM coming up, but you've got to be a member for a year to be on it. But go there and you will be horrified as to how that's been taken over. That's the first issue. So people can do something around civil liberties, which is in every state. And the second thing, it's not just about 2GB because it's an echo chamber. It's about ringing all those other radio stations and asking questions. How is it possible that Australians and the human rights issues is not being addressed within the Jewish community? And if people just ask that of the commentators in all the radio stations and whatever, it's actually getting the voices out to the masses as well. Because whilst children, yes, there are also parents of these children, and they're the ones who also need to carry some influence.
Yep, for sure. I think one of the things people have to realise, I've mentioned, the money that's come from petrodollars and Qatar particularly, but, these organisations, APAN has 7 full-time employees, and they've just advertised for a permanent legal person to engage with the Royal Commission, because their intent is to try and, again, flip the Royal Commission, right? So we don't have these resources out there matching against this. I can't even get enough money to pay the people doing the social media stuff. It's a challenge, and we do need to use the Royal Commission, though. People need to understand they have the ability to write submissions, and but they should also, to your point, go out there and join Amnesty International, and let's take that bloody organisation back, because it's pretty heinous. I mean, they all are. And it's going on at the UN as well. I mean, it's showing that poison of autocratization, and now all it is a vehicle for volumizing autocracy's propaganda and whitewashing their heinous regimes, and it's completely disappeared up its own backside, the UN. So, we've got a real issue there. So we just have to, bell the cat, get out there and join organisations and fight back. If you're prepared to take some slings and arrows and deal with, and own the term Zionist. This Zios phrase that David Duke, the former head of the Ku Klux Klan, popularised in the 1970s to be another word for Jews. Like I said to David Pocock, mate, do you support the two-state solution? If you do, you're a Zionist. So shut the fuck up. It's like, please just accept that badge of Zionist with pride and fight back.
Okay, so that's great. So thank you, Denise and Mike. So I think we need to end it there. I just want to thank you all for attending, and I'll hand over to Norman in a minute. Particularly thank Mike and Damien as speakers. I'll make sure that when I send out the recording that we have the link to Mike's podcast so you can support that. I can only say that you will get incredibly good information and accurate and strategic information from Mike. Also to let you know, as radios were mentioned, Norman and I are being interviewed by, I think it's 4ZZZ on Wednesday morning. Not sure if that's live or recorded, but I will let you know. We often do radio interviews. So I just want to thank you so much for attending. And just one little thing I think is really important. Education's come up a few times. Norman and I were very blessed when we attended the Anti-Semitism Envoys meeting with a number of Holocaust providers in Sydney recently. And Gillian Siegel said, we don't have any primary school anti-Semitism education, and we really need it. She said that a few times, and so Norman and I were able to say, well, as Indigenous Friends of Israel International, we have provided that. It is ready to go, 3 modules, depending on the age group. And so she said, well, give it to me. So Norman gave it to her. So she's going to try and get that into school. So if you can support that in any way, we would be truly grateful as well. So I want to thank you all, and handing over to Norman.
It's an honour having lawyer Damien Freeman and Dr. Michael Cully with us tonight. Mike, it's always fantastic hearing from you and what you've shared. And I think many of us here have received and taken in, and also how you delivered what you have tonight. It was very, very special. And it always, when you speak, it certainly touches our heart, and it raised that level to where I need to take that next step to, I know, even with Indigenous Friends of Israel and what I can do. Look, one of the things that I hope to do is when we get back to Sydney, which would be very soon, I'd like to be able to approach some of the elders from the Gadigal tribe in Sydney. As the term that was raised for, I use that term there now tonight, disgrace Tame, because of what she had spoken out. And let me say that there were many Indigenous people like myself that wasn't happy of what she spoke out, and also using one of the tribes of the Gadigal tribe to frame what she had said. I don't need to repeat it. One of the things for me, myself, Mike, and those that are on here tonight, is I would also just want to give you breaking news that I'm working on a piece of art that I want to deliver to the Sydney Jewish Museum. Also, when we come down there, and it would be priceless, because what took place on the 14th of December, as many of you know. So I would be delivering it, and I know that the Sydney Museum, the Jewish Sydney Museum, is in ways of, I think they're doing a lot of changes. There's to the building itself. So I hope to, as I said, have it finished and to present it. So
And it's called?
And it's called Shining Light. So if there's someone that you think I need to be in contact with, please let me know. Maybe those of you on here tonight could just leave a response to Barbara and myself on who do you believe it should be handed to, because I think it's very, very important from my side. And I just want to know many of our Jewish families that's on here tonight, not only my own natural family, we want to say to you again that we are with you. We stand strongly with you. And Barbara and myself, even though we're far from you, way here in Cairns, we just want you to know that we will always walk with you and stand shoulder to shoulder. So thank you, Dr. Mike Kelly, and also lawyer Damien Freeman, whom you've heard from. And I just want to say to you all tonight that you have a wonderful evening. And I know that you've been touched and impacted from the two wonderful speakers that we've had. And so I know for myself, I know I'll have to step up and see what else I can do even more.
God bless you all. God bless you too, in particular, for everything that you do, and especially highlighting that Gadigal country was where the massacre happened. So particularly heinous that Grace team chose that expression. So.
That's right. Okay, so thank you and God bless you, and have continue to have a wonderful evening, even though this has been such a difficult topic. Bye.
Shalom.
Shalom, shalom.
Bye.
Shalom, shalom.
Thanks, David.
Thanks,
Bye,
Dave.
Carol.
Thanks, Carol.
Shalom.